Welcome back to the story of my ancestors. In this video, we'll conclude the story of my maternal grandfather, Harry Rowley. After his wife Mabel's death in 1945, Harry continued to develop and grow the dairy business, but also spent considerable time upgrading the landscaping and gardens surrounding the home that he and his wife Mabel had remodeled and began to develop. And also Betty returned to the University of Connecticut and completed her degree in business management and graduated in the summer of 1947. There are some interesting notes in a diary that Betty kept during that time. And at her graduation, the guests that she had with her included, of course, her father, Harry, her Aunt Catherine, and then her mother's aunt, Mabel Hickox Hastings, and Mabel's daughter, Ellen Hastings. Now, when I asked my mom a little bit about that, she said that Mabel and her husband, George Hastings, had been frequent visitors to her mother in her later years up until George's passing in 1943. And Mabel had continued to keep up with Betty after she went back to school. Now, as far as Betty remembered, her daughter Ellen had certainly known Harry through family events and occasional times together, but that they had not dated or spent any considerable time together until after their getting reacquainted at her graduation. Now, following graduation, Betty moved home with Harry, and she went to work for the Connecticut General Life Insurance Company, and is pictured here in her business attire, probably on a Sunday, the way that Harry is dressed, but ready for work and ready for her professional career. Now, in the next photo, we have a picnic, and on the left is Munga Scoville and her grandson, Richard. Munga was Harry's housekeeper at that time, and pictured with Harry is a woman that Harry dated off and on during early 1947, and to Harry's right, a young man that was on a date with Betty, who's taking the picture in this case. We have their names listed on the back of the photo that's packed somewhere in storage, but I decided they really weren't that important because neither relationship worked out or continued. But remember the name Munga Scoville. We'll come back to her in just a few minutes. Now, by the fall of 1947, Harry and Ellen were dating on a more regular basis. And in early 1948, Ellen's mother, Mabel, became sick and died in the spring of 1948. And following that time, she and Harry's relationship became more serious. They were married on October 16th, 1948. The wedding took place at Ellen's sister's home, Marion Hastings Hale, overlooking the Connecticut River in Portland, Connecticut. Now, in the picture here, you see the Rowley family. On the left are Bob and Sally Bertini, and then Harry and Ellen, Betty, and then Catherine and Clarence Hosford. And after that wedding, Mabel and Harry settled back in together in the home, and Betty continued to live with them as well. The next big change in Harry's life was the sale of Rowley Dairy to his brother-in-law, Vincent Eddy, and his son, Frank. Now, Frank had just completed his degree in dairy management at the University of Connecticut after serving in World War II, and was starting to grow and develop the small dairy that his father had run. Now, in asking Betty about the reasons why her father sold the dairy, she said that as far as she knew, there were no problems or issues, but that it was a very competitive time in the dairy business, that dairies were consolidating after World War II and the economic growth that was happening. And the equipment that Harry had was probably at that time nearly 20 years old, and so there were reasons to need to upgrade and add delivery trucks. And Frank was much more eager to grow and develop that business. And Harry and his new wife, Ellen, were ready to kind of take a step back and have a little slower paced life. And so that's what they began to do. Now back to the story of Munga Scoville. As I mentioned, Munga was Harry's housekeeper and got to know Betty during that time of working for Harry. Now Munga was also a relative of Nan McDonald Scoville's husband, and through that got to know Jessie McDonald Radcliffe, who was Nan's sister. They often apparently played cards together, and so she through that had gotten to know Jessie's son Donald. She thought Donald and Betty would be a perfect match, and so she arranged a card game for them to be included and be together and get to know one another. They did, and of course, as they say, the rest is history. Don and Betty were married on May 13th, 1950. The picture here is from the reception, which was held at Harry and Ellen's home. You'll see Ellen and Harry on one side of Don and Betty, and then Don's parents, Frank and Jessie, on the right-hand side. Now, part of that slowing down and having a slower pace of life for Harry was becoming a gentleman farmer. Here he is cultivating the land on the north side of their house that they used for cornfields. Now, my mom Betty wasn't sure why he was doing that with a horse. She was pretty sure that her father had a tractor most of the time that he had the larger garden, and knew that he didn't keep horses at that point. But she was guessing that this was a horse belonging to Clinton Barrows, who was Harry's uncle and had married Harry's Aunt Hattie and lived diagonally across from their farm on Willard Avenue. And so part of developing that business was having a roadside stand. They sold their own produce that Harry and Ellen grew in their gardens, but also went to the farmers market in Hartford on a regular basis and began to grow and expand that business. Now, also in Harry and Ellen's life now was spending time with Don and Betty's growing family. Here they're at what I believe was my second birthday dinner, and enjoying and sharing that with the family. They also celebrated most Christmases at home together now, though they did begin on a regular basis going to Florida during the winter months. Probably not quite as long a time period as my parents did, but for 2 or 3 months every winter, they did go down to the Vero Beach area of Florida and enjoyed strolling along the beach. Again, if you notice, Harry's usually got a shirt and tie on, whatever he's doing here. But also they enjoyed going to Brooklyn Dodgers games. Now, coming out of a Red Sox family, that sounds almost heretical, but they went and saw the Brooklyn Dodgers at their spring training in Vero Beach on a regular basis. Now, Harry enjoyed working in the yard and taking on lots of projects. And in December of 1957, he decided on a cold day that he was going to personally dig up the access to the septic tank that they had in their yard. And unfortunately, while doing that, he suffered a massive heart attack, and he died on December 2nd of 1957. Now, he is buried in the Newington Center Cemetery alongside his first wife, Mabel. Now, Harry was only 63 when he died, and his death came as a real shock not only to Ellen and his daughter Betty, but really to the Newington community. He'd been very involved in the Congregational Church and many civic organizations in town. Ellen, of course, continued to live in the Rowley homestead and develop the garden and roadside stand that she and Harry had begun together. In future videos, we'll explore more about the Rowleys, maybe dig into Mabel's diary a little bit more and tell some fascinating stories from it, talk a little bit more about the Rowley home that my siblings and I knew growing up, and then also maybe look back into the older history of the Rowleys in Connecticut and the relationship with the Mayflower, and then the Rowleys immigrating to the United States from England. But all of that sometime in the future. In the next video, we're going to turn our attention to the Radcliffe side of the family tree. We'll take a particular look in the next video celebrating and commemorating our father Donald Radcliffe on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of his birth. Until next time, I hope you always hold precious memories of family close to your heart.